And then also, I guess this would be finally, in a face-to-face interview. So when the interview starts, usually after the initial small talk, the first question is always, so tell me a little bit about yourself. You can start with your audio business card, and then you can give them about a 10 or 15-second rundown of your experience and your education, and you follow that up with a bullet-pointed list of your 3 or 4 greatest strengths. And then you follow that up with a question, would you like to learn about any of these in more detail? Now I'm going to repeat that because I think it's worth writing down. So when somebody says in an interview, so tell me a little bit about yourself, you start with an audio business card, you give a 10-second rundown of your experience and education, and then you follow it up with a bullet-pointed list of 3 or 4 of your greatest strengths. By the way, if you are moving from one industry to another, one of those strengths may be that you learn quickly and you're able to contribute to the bottom line very quickly. And that's going to keep them from being afraid of you having to take forever to get up to speed. And then finally, after those bullet-pointed greatest strengths, you follow that up with the question, would you like to know more about would you like to learn about any of these in more detail? Or sometimes I say, if you're a little bit more forward, you can say, which of these would you like to talk about first? So I'm going to give you an example of Jeff, one of my current clients, who might say, he starts with the audio business card. So he might say, well, you know how some mid-sized companies in the consumer services field have the unfortunate perception of having low quality with their customers or with the public? Well, my expertise is really turning that around to where high quality is the number one thing customers think of when they think of that company. My MBA is in management, and I've spent the last 14 years working with Fortune 500 market leaders, most recently with an energy company based in Texas. And as a result of that experience, I've shown consistently strong departmental leadership, a great amount of focus on the customer's experience, and I've become an expert in new product campaigns and initiatives. Are there any of these that you'd like to talk about first? So there he's given... It's a rundown of his experience, but it's all focused on the audience. It's all focused on the employer. What can he do for an employer? That's what it's focused on. So if you were an employer sitting across the desk and you heard that, wouldn't you be blown away? So here are some questions that you can ask after you've given your audio business card. Now, this could be, again, in a networking situation. This could be in an interview situation, okay? So in a business or a networking situation, the first thing you want to do is find out about either their business or about the industry that they're in. You don't want to jump too quickly into questions related to yourself. Kind of like if an insurance salesman started a conversation with, so what insurance company are you using for your business right now? Now that's a little abrupt. So ask more general questions first, and then you can zero in on more specific things later. So let me give you some examples of some of the general questions. So, for instance, tell me a little bit about what you do. And again, this is networking in business situations. How did you get into your business? And what kind of customers do you work with? Who's an ideal customer for you? How do your services work? And what kind of results do you produce for your clientele or for your customers? And then a really great one is, what are some of your biggest challenges right now? So what I like to do is ask these kinds of questions first and really get interested in who they are and what their business is about. I have my clients do this. It's really non-threatening. I'm not using the third degree. It's a very relaxed conversation. And I'm also discovering whether or not this person is a potential networking partner or a potential employer that might need my expertise. For instance, if I'm in sales or marketing, I might ask, after some of those general questions, I might ask, well, what do you do to attract new business? And how is your business growing in this economy? And what are some of your goals for the coming year? And I don't want you to ask what I call manipulative questions. That tends to corner a prospect. For instance, if you were to say something really salesy like, if I could show you how to double your business in the next year, would you be interested? I mean, how many people have heard that from a sales guy and just rolled their eyes? You just want to run screaming. Instead, you can use stories to get people interested in doubling their business. For instance, you can talk about a recent employer was really struggling, but within a year, I had doubled his business. So you can use an example of a story rather than have one of those leading questions, those salesy questions. Now, marketing conversations never go exactly in that order. There are things that you can inject in the conversation as you're asking them questions. You might tell a story or give an example. It's always good to have those stories written down ahead of time and memorized, examples that have quantifiable results. But really, again, the most important part of this marketing conversation that you're having as far as pitching your one big idea, your expertise, is the questions and answers. It's actually much more important than all the things that you tell about your business. I do a workshop once a month. It's a resume reboot workshop the first Thursday of every month. By the way, if you're interested, it's free and it's in person, and it's off of 79th and Quivira, and I'll give you information toward the end of the call about that if you want. I think there's 8 or 9 spots left for June, so if you want to go to June 7th, I believe, that's available, and we basically, I help you rewrite your resume. But in one of the recent workshops, there was a gentleman that told us a story. He told us about a time that he met somebody and decided to just ask questions and listen and do nothing else. And after about 45 minutes of this, the other person had to go, and that person remarked, "You know, Mark, you are one of the most interesting people I have ever met." And Mark hadn't told him one single thing about himself. The fact that Mark was interested in him made him interesting. So keep that in mind. You know, unfortunately, I think most of us haven't developed and practiced this skill enough. I know that it's, for me, something that I constantly need to be cognizant of because I love to share my expertise, but listening is so much more important because you can't share your proper expertise unless you know what the issues are of the person that you're talking with. We always want to jump in, and sometimes we want to one-up the other person with what we know, what we've done, how we do business, etc. And if you listen to a lot of conversations, especially networking conversations, you'll notice that nobody's listening. Everybody's talking. And it's so funny to stand in a networking room and listen to all of these independent monologues going back and forth. It's not really a conversation. It's not a dialogue. You know, they might as well be talking to the wall for all the impact it's making because they are independent monologues. So if you want to have a marketing conversation that actually gets you somewhere, you've got to put your listening cap on and really focus on the other person. You get intrigued or fascinated, enthralled by this person that you're interacting with. And this is what everybody wants, to be heard, to be listened to be treated as if they matter. And this includes employers. And when you do this, you'll stand out amongst every other, like a prince among paupers. You'll stand out from 99% of all the other job seekers. People will see you as an interesting and caring and sincere person, and that opens the door ultimately to talk about you and what you have to offer. And in social situations or even in a phone interview out of the blue with someone calling you, you do very much the same. The questions might be a little different than what I mentioned before, but the listening is always the same. You're always in the initial stages of a relationship that may actually go somewhere in social situations. You don't want to jump the gun and start blabbing all about the great things you've done in your career without finding out about them first. It's just a turnoff. I've called it before when people show up and then they throw up. Literally, they come to a networking meeting and all they do is talk about themselves. They've got to get their message out, and then they leave with a bunch of cards and they don't follow up. It's just a disaster. But the first step on the path to listening is to write out the list of questions that you might ask somebody in a variety of situations. So write down that initial list, then you can expand on those later And what I recommend is writing down a lot of questions first and then organizing and prioritizing them. And the next step is to practice them out loud. So get comfortable with them. Make sure that the wording is comfortable and try them out with a spouse or with a friend. Remember, you're not trying to manipulate somebody into giving you a job or, in the case of networking, into getting you a job. You're just initiating a relationship. Okay, so now next let's go into how to keep the conversation going by answering questions. Because, of course, it's not going to be all about just listening. You're going to have to answer questions. In the course of marketing conversations, whether it's networking or it's interviews, people are also going to ask you questions. So if you think about the most successful interviews, those that actually end up in a job offer. And I can tell you this because I have had rundowns from my clients of dozens upon dozens upon dozens of successful interviews. This is the way they happen. They're often just two-way exploratory conversations. They are not back and forth like you're lobbing a tennis ball back and forth in a question and answer session. It doesn't go question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. Especially not for a six-figure position. If you get someone, usually in HR, who's inexperienced, you might get someone who only has a list of questions on their page, and they're not prepared to answer any questions, and that can be a very difficult situation. However, for the most part, when you're talking to a decision maker, it really is a two-way exploratory conversation. Their questions will be intermingled with your questions. And here's another opportunity to either go way off track in the marketing conversation or to deepen the connection and the relationship. And it's kind of funny how easily it is to do these things wrong. I mean, it's just, you really got to make sure that you stay on target. What typically happens is that someone gets a question and answers it, but they can't stop talking. And that happens in networking conversations. It happens in an employer interview. You know, and 20 minutes later, they've basically told everything possible about their career and sometimes everything possible about their entire life. And then the employer, maybe the networking prospect, just politely asks them for their business card, and they're really never heard from again. Again, that's that show up and throw up problem. So what happened? They forgot the most important thing in the marketing conversation is to listen and not talk. And this is even true if the employer or the recruiter or the networking prospect is asking you questions. They ask you the time and you tell them how to build a watch. It just doesn't work. So you need to learn how to answer questions briefly and then turn around and ask another question of the prospect. And at this point, in the conversation, you can find out more specifically about what their needs are. And you can't find this information out just by talking. What I'd like to do is give you a sample conversation, what I would consider a marketing conversation during a job interview. So this conversation picks up after you've asked a lot of general questions about their business, and then they ask a question based upon what they already know. Let's say for instance, you've used your audio business card earlier in the conversation. And it's really important to pay attention to what's going on in the conversation that I'm about to read to you, because I wrote this out specifically because this is the way that a successful two-way conversation happens in an interview. It really outlines the most successful interviews for six-figure positions. So an employer might say, what are the kind of things that you do to improve a company's marketing results? Let's say it's a marketing manager or a marketing director's position. And what you can say is, well, what I did for my last employer was I started with an in-depth analysis of what their current marketing efforts were and then quantified what results they were getting, which they hadn't done before. Then I conducted a comprehensive assessment of their competition, which they'd also never done before. And since they were number 6 in their market share at the time, I determined the best course of action for their business because they had a new product which they had already developed a brand for, but didn't know how to maximize that for the marketplace. Well, I determined a combination of a targeted, limited direct mail campaign, as well as revamping of their website, which was the best use of their very limited marketing budget. And as a result, that product became number 2 in the marketplace within 6 months. If I may ask a question, have you quantified the marketing efforts of what you've been doing in the past? And then let's, for instance, say the employer says, well, we did some print advertising a couple of years ago, but we really didn't track the results. And then you can say, well, I've conducted some print advertising campaigns myself. In fact, I had one that yielded about a 12-to-1 return on investment. What are some of the marketing activities you're doing now? Well, we're mainly working off of referrals. We've had a referral campaign where we've given incentives to clients who refer our services. We have a pretty limited marketing budget, and we try to do things creatively to squeeze the most out of it as possible. You say you've worked with small budgets. What size marketing budgets have you worked with? And so then you say, oh, well, I've worked with some bigger ones up to $3.8 million, but also one with a startup business area that only had about $30,000 annually to work with. So that gave me the opportunity to maximize brand awareness through a lot of community outreach. I attended a lot of networking meetings, social events, talked to a lot of local newspapers and magazines, and put out press releases to get the word out without using a lot of money. And that's what got that new product to a number 2 market share. Are you using any marketing strategies that are producing results like that? And so then they can say, well, not so much. We get a lot of exposure from our business. Most of our business comes from word of mouth. You know, marketing is a lot of work, isn't it? And then you can say, not necessarily. It depends on what you want. Many companies are satisfied where they are now, but a lot of businesses want to take things to the next level. I mean, what are some of your goals for the next year? And the employer can say, well, we have a goal in 2012 to increase business by 20% if possible. Well, that's a great goal. So what's your plan? Well, I've been thinking about doing some things, but mostly referral programs and maybe some online advertising. Do you have any experience with online advertising?